Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome. My name is Janelle and I discuss mental health, self-development, and everything in between. If you've watched any of my videos, you'll know that I've always talked about the narrative. And what I mean is that we've all internalized a narrative about ourselves and the world around us. Sometimes it's positive and oftentimes it's negative. In this video, I'll break down everything regarding the narrative, starting from the beginning, middle, and the end. Plus, I'll provide tips and examples on how to move forward. Let's dive in. Let me ask you guys a question. What's the narrative you internalized about yourself? Keep in mind that these narratives are usually established from childhood. They may sound something like, I'm not enough, there's something wrong with me, I'm not deserving of happiness, I'm a burden, if people see the real me, they're not gonna like me. And if you watched my last video, I talked about the narrative that I actually internalized about myself growing up regarding my height and my weight. And underneath all of that was this fear of rejection and this fear of not being enough because I didn't look a certain way. And we don't always have these narratives at the forefront of our mind, but it does show up in our behavior. For example, let's say that you're dating someone and you're constantly asking them, why did you choose me? Or you start to doubt their true feelings for you, even though they haven't given you any reason to doubt them. You may say something along the lines of, fine, go back to your ex if you think I'm not enough. And now they're looking at you like, what are you really talking about? You're feeling insecure and your behavior is very unhealthy. Your partner may actually accuse you of being toxic. What's actually happening is that you are self-sabotaging the relationship due to the negative narrative that you carry about yourself. How can someone like them like me? What if they see my flaws? If they get to know me, they won't like me. Someone like me isn't lovable. Because of the false narrative you have about yourself, it now impacts your relationships in a negative way. In the relationship, you're not telling your partner, you're too good for me, which is your deep inner thought. What you're actually doing is you're questioning their loyalty. You're preventing them from, let's say, going out with friends because you fear that they may cheat on you. You don't have a lot of trust for them, and you want this constant reassurance that they love you. Eventually, over time, your behavior becomes so unhealthy, and when your partner starts to pull away, it actually corroborates the existing narrative. See, I knew I wasn't good enough, and the cycle continues. Another example is that you're just simply easygoing. So what's wrong with easygoing? I'll tell you. The person who is easygoing, they have no boundaries, they think speaking up for themselves is confrontation, and they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. They rarely have an opinion and they want to be perceived as a nice person. They never express their own feelings and they rarely ever say no. With this behavior, the person, they may actually fear rejection or abandonment, and they highly care about the opinion of others. And they want to be seen as a nice person all the time. To them, anything outside of the mentioned behavior may equate to being mean or selfish. Perhaps growing up, they were called mean by their parent, or they called selfish by their parent, let's say, for not sharing, or for maybe setting boundaries and saying no. Just a side note, our behavior can be caused by many different things, and I'm only just providing one example out of many, so just keep that in mind as we move along. My next question is, whose narrative did you internalize? We don't just wake up one day with this deeply ingrained negative view about ourselves. As I previously mentioned, these narratives are usually established in childhood. So my narrative about myself when I was growing up came from my family and my peers and society. And this is important to note because some people think that they're born flawed. Always remember, you were born a blank slate in this world, and we absorb the narrative from our caregivers and our environment. For example, were you considered a burden because you may have asked for your basic needs to be met? Did you have to please your caregiver or your peers at school in order for them not to get upset with you? Did you grow up in an environment that made you feel like anything you did was never enough? Or did you have those parents that said, where is the remaining 5%, even though you got 95% on like a major test? Did you grow up never seeing yourself represented on television shows? Were you told that you're not a good child, or you're selfish because you tried to set boundaries, and maybe you were considered disrespectful for speaking up for yourself, because in some families, children are actually meant to be seen and not heard. These are all examples of how you may have developed your current narrative that you operate in. So if you feel like you're not enough, or you feel like you can't tell others how you feel because you don't want to be considered a burden, ask yourself this: when was the first time you felt that way? This goes to whatever narrative you currently have about yourself. Think back to the first time you felt uncomfortable, not seen, scared, maybe anxious, not heard, shamed, self-doubt, or you had body image issues, or you felt silenced. Now that you know what the narrative you operate in is and where it stems from, ask yourself this question: what is actually keeping you stuck in the narrative? To be honest, it can be many different things. Oftentimes, we don't recognize the inner critic doesn't belong to us. So we forget that certain things from our past may impact us more than we actually realize. I often hear, that happened in the past, Chanel. It happened so long ago. It doesn't bother me anymore. I moved on. But in actuality, it can be hard to face that difficult period because you have to now deal with the emotions and pain associated with it. We feel like we're opening up an old can of worms, when in actuality, it's never been closed. It's just always been open, but we've chosen to ignore it, or we just had to move forward with life. Or perhaps the person who actually did the harm, they're still in your life now, and you guys are now in a better space. We can't avoid it forever because it always comes out in our behavior, whether we like it or not. Another reason why folks are stuck is because the negative narrative is so deeply ingrained that it's hard to think differently. So it's hard to see yourself in a new light because you've believed the narrative for so long. Perhaps you're still in the environment that created the negative narrative, or you may not know where to start or how to make changes. A big one that I often hear and that I see is fear. Fear of the unknown and fear that nothing will change. What if they're right about me? This goes into why it's hard to create and believe the new narrative. Let me tell you something. It's hard work. None of this is easy. You are unlearning to relearn. You're learning that the narrative you operate in isn't your own. You're learning that you may have unresolved issues from your past, and you're learning that you didn't have a chance to develop into your true nature because that wasn't fostered. And you are now relearning you, who you truly are outside of the labels that have been placed on you. That is a lot to digest. And on top of that, some of the people in your life may be still fostering the old narrative, which continues to reaffirm that you aren't enough, and that keeps you stuck in the cycle. Or you're around people who want to love you, but you won't let them in, so you push them away, and now you have this label as being toxic because you don't feel understood. Now what? Well, the next step is to separate yourself from the lies. How? Well, you start by telling yourself the whole story. I'm sure some of you have heard me mention tell yourself the full story. And what I mean is the narrative didn't begin with you, and you haven't allowed yourself to explore the truth. So for example, you may have had this narrative that you can't ask for support or you'll be seen as a burden. It's a vicious cycle because you want to connect with others and ask for support, but your fear of being seen as a burden is holding you back. And this brings you back to feelings of isolation and loneliness. And you may even tell yourself that you don't have anyone to connect with, even though they're standing right in front of you. However, it may not be the people that you actually want to connect with. And that is a whole nother video on its own. Telling yourself the full story means going back to the first time you felt like a burden. Did someone tell you that you're a burden? Was it the circumstances that you were involved in that made you feel like a burden? For example, let's say you grew up in an impoverished family and you hear your family fighting and worrying about money, groceries, paying the bills, school supplies, and you have internalized that you're a burden. As a kid, you may have said, if it weren't for me, Dad wouldn't have to worry about my school lunches or buying my school snacks. Remember, this is a child who is interpreting the information the best way they know how. Now, in order to help Dad, they may want to become less of a burden by being more self-sufficient, not complaining or asking for things that they need or want. They may say, I'm okay, don't worry about me, Dad. As they get older, they've become so hyper-independent, but they may also feel lonely. Asking for support may be extremely difficult and uncomfortable. You can change this by telling yourself the full story. Okay, so this is a script that you can read to yourself. Even though I feel like a burden, I know it's not true. It stems from childhood when my family was constantly fighting and talking about not having enough money. I blamed myself. I thought if I took up less space and did things on my own, I'd be helping my dad. However, I was only a kid. I was never a burden. My parents had financial issues, which is very normal for many families. As I got older, I didn't realize how hyper-independent I became. Moving forward, I will try to ask for my needs and wants to be met. It's okay to ask for support. Even though I feel guilty and uncomfortable, the discomfort doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong, and it doesn't mean I'm a burden. It just means I'm not used to this new behavior, but it will get easier. Reading the script every morning and night will help you to change the narrative. Oh, and I also want to remind you that someone not showing up for you and telling you that you're too much, it doesn't mean it's confirmation that you were right all along. It just means that the person isn't able to give you what you need at that moment. Try to avoid overgeneralizing situations as a confirmation to your negative thoughts. Changing the narrative is hard work, but it's not impossible. This takes openness to change, willing to explore deeper emotions, hurt feelings, and patience. If you made it to the end of this video, thanks for watching. If you feel comfortable, please comment below about the narrative that you currently operate in and how you're working to make changes. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.